For 28 years, I put men like him in cages. And on a cold Thanksgiving afternoon in New Jersey, one of them was sitting at my daughter's dinner table, and nobody in that room had the first idea who I really was. Welcome to True Elder Tales. If you believe some quiet old men are carrying more than anyone around them ever guesses, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I read every single one. Now let's get into it. My name is Harold Vance. I'm 70 years old, and for 28 years I worked special victims out of a precinct in Newark, the kind of unit where you spend your career looking at the worst things people do to children, so that fewer children have to live through them. I retired at 62 with a wall of commendations I never hung up, because Eleanor, my wife, always said a man shouldn't decorate his house with other people's worst days. She passed 6 years ago, heart failure quick, the way I suppose I'd have wanted it for her if anyone had asked me. To my daughter Rosalind, to her husband Desmond, and especially to Desmond's stepfather, I was just Grandpa Harold, the quiet old man in Trenton who fed the birds and drove a rusted-out Ford pickup and complained about his knees. Nobody outside the department ever really knew what I'd done for a living beyond the word detective, and I preferred it that way. Alina used to say I brought my work home in my face some nights, even when I never said a word about it, and after she was gone, I made sure nobody ever had to see that face again if I could help it. Rosalind married Desmond 9 years ago. Good man, mostly quiet like me, worked as an HVAC technician, steady hands, steady temperament. His mother had remarried when he was in his 20s to a man named Corwin Betts, who owned two auto parts stores across Mercer County and never let a room forget it. I'd met Corwin maybe a dozen times over the years at holidays and cookouts, and every single time, he'd found some small, careless way to remind everyone at the table who was paying for what. I hadn't seen my granddaughter Junie in almost 4 months. Rosalind's texts had gotten shorter, more functional, the kind of messages that answer a question without inviting a follow-up one. Thanksgiving's at Corwin's this year. You're welcome to come. No warmth in it, just logistics. I'd mailed Junie a birthday card in September with a $20 bill and a little drawing of the two of us fishing, since she'd been asking to go with me all summer. It never got a thank you call. I told myself kids get busy. I told myself a lot of things that fall. I drove out to Corwin's place on a gray Thursday morning, that development of new-build colonials with the driveways too wide for the houses, and parked my truck behind Corwin's Cadillac Escalade, feeling, not for the first time, like a man arriving somewhere he wasn't quite sure he belonged. Junie ran to me the second I walked through the door, all elbows and energy, 8 years old, missing a front tooth, throwing her arms around my waist. "Grandpa, you smell like the truck." I laughed. She felt thinner than I remembered, and when her sleeve rode up as she hugged me, I caught a glimpse of a bruise along her upper arm, greenish yellow, a week old at least, the kind of color a trained eye doesn't forget how to read even years after retirement. Corwin came around the corner holding a glass of something brown, 3 in the afternoon, already flushed in the face. "Well, look who made it," he said, sizing me up the way he always did, like he was checking the mileage on a used car. "Still driving that heap, Harold." "Runs fine," I said. "Detective, right? Is that what you did? Some kind of paper-pushing gig with the department?" He said it drawing the word detective out slow like it tasted strange in his mouth. "Me, I built something real. 2 locations, 18 employees. You ever wonder what that's like, Desmond, building something with your own 2 hands?" Desmond stared at his plate. My son-in-law had worked 9 years at the same HVAC company, steady and honest, and Corwin spent most holidays grinding that fact down into something small. "Your mother raised you soft," Corwin said at dinner, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Sitting there like you're afraid of your own house." I kept eating. I watched the room the way I'd watched 1,000 rooms across 3 decades of interviews, the small ticks and tensions nobody else at that table seemed to notice. Or maybe they'd just gotten too used to noticing and looking away. Junie reached for the gravy boat and knocked it, just slightly, a few drops landing near Corwin's placemat. It was nothing. It was the kind of small accident that happens at every family dinner in America. Corwin's face changed instantly. "Junie." His voice dropped into something flat and cold. "Come here." Desmond started to say something, some small crack of protest, and Corwin cut him off with a look that had clearly worked on him for years. Junie slid off her chair and walked around the table with her shoulders already climbing toward her ears, the exact posture I'd seen on 100 children in 100 interview rooms over 28 years. An 8-year-old shouldn't know how to brace herself like that. Nobody should have to teach a child that. It happened fast. Corwin grabbed her upper arm, the same arm with the old bruise, and his open hand caught her across the cheek hard enough that the sound of it cracked through the dining room like a dropped plate. Nobody moved for one full second. Desmond half rose from his chair. Corwin's wife, Marilee, didn't even look up from her plate. "Good," she said quietly. "She needs to learn not to be careless." I folded my napkin, set it beside my plate, and stood up slowly. "I need to use the restroom," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected it to. Corwin waved a hand at me, already turning back to his drink. "Try not to fall in, old man." I walked down the hallway, closed the bathroom door behind me, sat down on the edge of the tub, and pulled out my phone. My hands weren't shaking, which surprised me a little given everything. 28 years teaches you that, at least. I scrolled to a number I hadn't used in almost 3 years and pressed call. It rang twice before a familiar voice picked up. "Boss, that you?" "It's me, Priya," I said quietly. "I need a unit out to a residence in Hopewell Township, right now." "Hopewell Township," I said again, giving Priya the address off the mailbox I'd noticed on my way in. "Witnessed felony assault of a minor approximately 8 years old. Adult male, roughly 60, intoxicated. Struck the child across the face hard enough to leave a mark. I observed it directly. Grandmother present verbally approved. I'm in the residence. Child needs medical evaluation." There was a beat of silence on the line, and then Priya's voice, sharper now, all business. "Jesus. Boss, we're rolling. Give me that address one more time." I gave it to her slowly, clearly, the way I'd trained a dozen rookies to relay information under pressure over the years. "One more thing, Priya," I said. "The individual's name is Corwin Betts. Owns Betts Auto Parts, 2 locations in Mercer County. If you can get a courtesy call out to the township chief and to whoever's on call at the prosecutor's office, this is going to get loud fast." "Already making the calls," she said. "You holding up okay, Harold?" "I will be," I said, and I meant it, though I wasn't entirely sure yet. I splashed cold water on my face, looked at the tired, lined reflection in Corwin's bathroom mirror, and thought about all the times over 28 years I'd told parents in an interview room that none of this was their fault, that they couldn't have known, that hindsight is a cruelty nobody deserves. I thought about how easy that was to say to someone else, and how hard it was to believe about myself in that moment. Then I opened the camera app on my phone, started recording, and walked back out to the dining room holding the phone low against my hip, the way I'd been taught decades ago and never quite forgot. Junie was back in her chair, one hand pressed lightly against her cheek, eating a green bean at a time mechanically, the particular stillness of a child who has learned that finishing the plate quietly is the safest available option. Corwin had already turned his attention back to Desmond, lecturing him now about how football built character in a way that these soft modern sports never could. "No offense intended, son. None at all." I kept filming. I kept my face as still as I'd kept it across 3 decades of watching men, just like him, talk themselves into believing they hadn't done anything wrong. The doorbell rang 19 minutes later. 2 Hopewell Township officers, a Mercer County Sheriff's deputy, a paramedic, and walking in just behind them with gray now threading through what used to be jet black hair, Priya Anand, 53 years old, a detective I'd trained myself 22 years earlier on her very first child abuse case. Corwin stood up so fast his chair nearly toppled. "What in God's name is this? This is private property. This is harassment." Priya knelt down first beside Junie, her voice gentle in a way I'd heard her use 100 times before. "Hi, sweetheart, I'm Priya. I'm a police officer. This nice paramedic is going to take a quick look at you, okay? You're not in any trouble." Then she stood, and her eyes found Corwin's, steady and unblinking. "We received a report from a witness inside this residence describing a felony assault on a minor," she said. I'm going to need everyone to remain seated. Witness. What witness? Corwin's face was already flushing a deeper red. Priya turned toward me and something in her expression softened just slightly. Can you confirm what you reported, sir? I set my napkin down on the table, folded once, the way Alina always did hers. My name is Harold Vance, I said. I'm Junie's grandfather. Approximately 20 minutes ago in this room, I personally witnessed Mr. Betts strike this child across the face with an open hand after grabbing her arm. The strike was audible. His wife verbally approved of the action immediately afterward. I have video. Corwin's mouth opened and closed once, like a man trying to find solid ground on ice. You called the cops on me. Who exactly do you think you are, old man? Priya's jaw tightened in a way I recognized from 100 interrogation rooms. This man is Detective Harold Vance, retired. 28 years with special victims. He trained half the detectives in this county, myself included. When Harold Vance tells me what he saw, I don't need him to finish the sentence before I believe every word of it. Room went very quiet. Rosalind was staring at me like she'd genuinely never seen my face before, which, I suppose, in a way, she hadn't. Not this version of it. The paramedic finished her initial check on Junie and looked up. There's swelling along the cheekbone, and I want to get a proper look at that bruise on her upper arm, too. I'd like to transport her for evaluation. She's fine, Marilee snapped. This is completely unnecessary. Ma'am, the paramedic said evenly, that isn't a decision that belongs to you right now. Desmond stood up slowly, both hands flat against the table like he needed it to hold him upright. Take her, he said, voice cracking on the second word. Take my daughter to the hospital. I'm coming with her. As the paramedic carried Junie past me, wrapped in a foil blanket, my granddaughter reached one small hand out and caught two of my fingers. Grandpa, are you coming too? Right behind you, I told her. I promise. Corwin Betts was arrested at his own Thanksgiving table at 4:52 in the afternoon, still wearing a cranberry-stained napkin tucked into his collar. Degree aggravated assault, endangering the welfare of a child. Marilee wasn't cuffed, but she received a very clear explanation of mandatory reporting laws and a promise of a follow-up call from the Division of Child Protection and Permanency. At the hospital, the doctors found a hairline fracture along Junie's cheekbone and confirmed the older bruising on her arm was consistent with a firm grip, applied more than once over time. Desmond sat in the hallway with his head in his hands and made a sound I don't think I'd ever heard a grown man make before, somewhere between a sob and a growl. Harold, he finally said, looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Who are you? Junie's grandfather, I told him. That's what I am. Everything else was just a job I used to have. I explained why I'd never told them the particulars of my career, why I'd always let myself be the quiet guy in the beat-up truck instead of the man with the commendations. I hadn't wanted my work following me home to family dinners. I'd wanted, more than anything, to just be Grandpa Harold. Desmond asked why I hadn't said something sooner, back when Corwin first started needling him at holidays, back before any of this. Because people show you who they are, Desmond, I said. When they think nobody important is paying attention. I was watching. I just didn't know it would come to this. He asked, quietly, what he was supposed to do now about his mother, about the family he'd grown up in. I told him that wasn't a decision I could make for him. But I also told him that the state was about to file charges, that a caseworker was about to open a file on his stepfather's household, and that somewhere in the next few days, he was going to have to decide, clearly and without hedging, whose side he was standing on. He looked down the hallway toward the pediatric ward doors for a long moment before he answered. Hers, he said. Junie's, always hers. We start there. The next morning, before the coffee had even finished brewing, I called an old friend named Odalise Ferreira, a retired sex crimes prosecutor turned family law attorney who stood barely 5 feet tall and had once made a defense attorney cry during closing arguments without raising her voice once. Send me everything by Wednesday, she said, after I'd explained it all. I'm going to enjoy this one. Then I made a second call, this one to an old colleague from the Financial Crimes Unit, a soft-spoken auditor named Desmond Acaffer who'd spent 2 decades picking apart small businesses that didn't add up on paper. "I want to know something about Betts Auto Parts," I said. "2 locations, Mercer County. I want to know if the books are clean." There was a pause on the line, long enough that I could practically hear him smiling. "Harold Vance, are we doing what I think we're doing?" "Just an old man asking a friend a professional question," I said. He laughed, low and knowing. "You haven't lost a step in 6 years. Give me 4 days." I wasn't in any particular hurry. 28 years in that line of work teaches you something important, something I'd carried with me long after I turned in my badge. Men who are willing to strike a child across the face when they think nobody's watching do not, as a rule, run especially clean businesses anywhere else in their lives. There's always a second set of books somewhere. You just have to know where an old detective still has friends willing to look. Junie came home from the hospital 3 days later with a soft brace along her jaw and a folder of paperwork nobody in that family had ever imagined needing. She came home to my house, not Rosalind and Desmond's, because Marilee had already hired an attorney and started making noise about grandparent visitation rights, and Odalys wanted a clean, documented separation while the case moved forward. I want to tell you, those first few nights were hard in a way that surprised even me, and I'd spent nearly 3 decades sitting across tables from frightened children. Junie flinched at the sound of the dishwasher closing. She asked the second night very quietly if Corwin was going to be at Christmas. I told her no, not this year, not ever again if I had anything to say about it, and I watched something in her small shoulders come down half an inch, like a held breath finally released. I bought her a real fishing rod, the kind with her name engraved on the reel, and set it in the corner of the living room where she could see it from the couch. I didn't push. 28 years teaches you that healing doesn't respond well to being rushed. The first time she really laughed again was the night she asked if I used to be a spy. "No, sweetheart," I told her. "I was a detective. I just asked people a lot of questions and paid attention to their answers." She thought about that for a long moment, chewing on it the way kids do. "That's kind of like a spy," she decided. Then, a beat later, "Bad guys think old people aren't paying attention. That's dumb of them." I laughed until my eyes were wet, and it was the first time I'd laughed like that since a leaner passed. 10 days after Thanksgiving, Desmond Acaffer called me back, and I could hear in the first 3 words of his voice that he'd found something worth calling about. "Harold," he said, "Betts Auto Parts has been running dirty for at least 5 years. Both locations." He walked me through it slowly, the way he always did, laying out a financial picture the same careful way I used to lay out a timeline of evidence for a jury. Corwin had been buying salvage title vehicles and damaged parts inventory out of state through a shell company registered in Delaware, washing the paperwork, and reselling parts and labor at full retail prices without ever properly declaring the source. Structured cash deposits just under the federal reporting threshold, over and over, a pattern that screamed exactly what it was to anyone trained to notice it. Desmond's conservative estimate put the unreported income somewhere north of $800,000 over 5 years. "The registered agent on the Delaware LLC," he added, "is Marilee Betts, not just a bystander in this, Harold, a co-signer on every filing." I sat on my back steps that evening with my old dog, a graying retriever named Scout, resting his head against my knee, listening to Junie laugh at something on the television inside, and I thought about how none of this felt like victory. It felt more like watching a slow leak finally get traced back to its source. You don't celebrate a leak. You just feel the quiet relief of the dripping finally stopping. I called Odalys the next morning and told her what Desmond Acaffer had found. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, in that soft, dangerous voice she used right before she destroyed someone in a courtroom, "Harold, I'm going to enjoy every single second of this." Criminal case against Corwin moved faster than I expected. My video evidence, the medical documentation, Junie's forensic interview conducted by a specialist Priya personally recommended, all of it built a case that his attorney tried and failed to make disappear with an early plea offer. The state wanted a trial, And once the financial evidence started circling in through a parallel investigation, Corwin's legal troubles stopped being just about one Thanksgiving afternoon. 6 weeks after the incident, Corwin received a certified letter from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division opening a formal inquiry. 3 days after that, the New Jersey Motor Vehicle Commission suspended both of his dealer parts licenses pending review. 2 days later, his floor financing on both locations got pulled entirely because the license suspension violated the terms of his loan agreements. Within the span of a single week, a man who had walked into a Thanksgiving dinner talking about the 18 employees he'd hired watched his entire business empire freeze solid around him. He called Desmond, screaming, according to Desmond, that his father-in-law had destroyed him out of spite. "I don't think he did anything except tell the truth," Desmond said quietly, and hung up the phone. Marilee filed for an emergency custody evaluation that same week, apparently expecting some easy path back to visitation. Instead, she got Odalise Ferreira, who filed a countermotion the same afternoon supported by 31 exhibits, medical records, the police report, the forensic interview summary, and sworn statements from two neighbors who'd heard raised voices and slammed doors from that house for years and never known who to tell. By the week before Christmas, Desmond and Rosalind had full emergency custody of Junie. By late January, that custody was made permanent, with any future contact from Corwin's side of the family contingent on completing a court-ordered family violence intervention program. Marilee never enrolled. Corwin's criminal trial began in March. I sat in the third row every single day, in a blue suit I'd bought specifically for the occasion, and I watched a jury take just under 2 hours to reach a unanimous verdict. Guilty on all counts. The judge, a stern woman with reading glasses perched low on her nose, told him plainly that a grown man striking an 8-year-old child hard enough to fracture bone, and then returning calmly to his dinner, was not merely criminal but genuinely contemptible, and sentenced him to 4 years with a mandatory minimum of 2. He never once looked in my direction, the entire trial. Junie was waiting on my porch with Scout when I got home that afternoon. "He's going away for a long time," I told her, sitting down beside her on the top step. "Good," she said very simply, the way only a child can say something so enormous with so little weight attached to it. Then, after a pause, "Are we still going fishing this weekend?" "Wouldn't miss it," I said. We drove up to my brother's cabin in the Poconos that Saturday, and Junie caught a 12-inch smallmouth bass, the biggest fish of her short life, grinning wide enough to show the gap where her missing tooth still hadn't grown back in. I have that photograph on my mantle now, right next to the one of Alina at our own wedding, 60 years and one small, fierce granddaughter apart. But there was still one conversation left that I hadn't had yet, and it came sooner than I expected, on a rainy afternoon in April, when Rosalind showed up at my door alone, looking thinner than I remembered, asking if she could sit down and talk. I made coffee and set it in front of her without asking if she wanted any, the way you do for family, even family that's hurt you without meaning to. Rosalind wrapped both hands around the mug like it was the only warm thing left in the world and didn't drink from it for a long while. "I keep thinking about that night," she finally said, replaying it, wondering how I missed it for so long. "You didn't miss it," I told her. "You just grew up watching your mother-in-law tell you that man's temper was the price of a nice house and a comfortable life. That's not the same as missing something, Rosalind. That's just what happens to people who are taught slowly over years that speaking up costs more than staying quiet." She looked up at me, eyes red-rimmed. "You knew that too. You told me once when I was a kid that people show you exactly who they are the moment they think it's safe to." "I did tell you that," I said. "I just forgot to apply it to my own family sooner than I should have." We sat with that for a while, the rain ticking steadily against my kitchen window, the same window where Alina used to watch the birds at the feeder every morning of her life. I'd kept that feeder full every single day since she passed, mostly out of habit, though some mornings I liked to think she was still keeping an eye on things through it. I need to ask you something, Rosalind said, and I need you to be honest with me. Did you plan all of this? The financial investigation, all of it? Or did it just happen? I thought about how to answer that carefully because it deserved a careful answer. I made 2 phone calls, I said. One to report what I saw with my own eyes, which any decent person would have done. The other was a question, one professional to another, asking whether a business looked clean. Everything that happened after that happened because Corwin had spent years building something dishonest, and eventually the people whose job it is to notice those things noticed. I didn't destroy him, Rosalind. I just stopped protecting him from the consequences of choices he'd already made a long time before that Thanksgiving. That's a very fine distinction, she said quietly. It's the only distinction that's ever mattered to me, I told her. Revenge is something you do because it makes you feel powerful. Justice is something you allow to happen because you finally stop standing in its way. I spent 28 years learning the difference, and I'll be honest with you, I still don't always get it exactly right. But I know which one keeps a person able to sleep at night and which one doesn't. She was quiet for a long time after that, turning the coffee mug slowly in her hands. Junie asked me last week if you used to catch bad guys, she said eventually, a small, wet laugh escaping despite everything. I didn't know what to tell her. Tell her the truth, I said. Tell her I used to listen very carefully to people, and sometimes that was enough to help. Before she left that afternoon, Rosalind hugged me at the door for longer than she had in years, and she whispered, "Thank you for not staying quiet this time," into my shoulder, and I held on to her and didn't trust myself to answer right away. I want to tell you something now, and I think it matters more than anything else in this whole story. I am 70 years old. I still live in the same small house in Trenton. I still drive that same rusted-out Ford pickup, though Desmond keeps threatening to buy me a new one, and I keep telling him the old one still starts fine on cold mornings, which is mostly true. Junie stays with me every other weekend now, for the big backyard, for Scout, for the workshop out back where I'm slowly teaching her to whittle small wooden birds, badly, but with more patience than I ever expected an 8-year-old to have for anything. She sleeps through the night these days. She plays soccer now instead of the gymnastics Marilee had insisted on, because she asked her father if she could switch, and Desmond said yes without a second's hesitation. Some evenings, after she's asleep on the pull-out couch in my den, Desmond and I sit out on the back porch and just listen to the crickets together, not saying much of anything, which I've come to understand is its own kind of conversation between two men who have been through something together. One night last fall, he put his hand on my shoulder before he left and said, "Thank you, Harold, for 28 years of never once making me feel small for not knowing, and for the one night you finally let it show." I didn't have an answer for that either. I just put my hand over his for a moment, the way you do when words would only get in the way of something simpler and truer. Here's what I've come to believe. After 70 years and 28 of them spent looking closely at the very worst things people are capable of doing to the ones who trust them most, people will look at a quiet old man in a rusted truck and decide, instantly and completely, what he is and isn't capable of. Let them. Let every single one of them be wrong. The people who actually matter to you will find out who you are eventually, usually exactly when it counts the most. And the ones who never bother to find out were never worth the truth in the first place. I'm the boring man who feeds the birds and complains about his knees. I'm also the man who made the call. Both of those things are true at the exact same time, and I've stopped needing anyone else to understand how. If you stayed with me all the way to the end of this one, I'm genuinely grateful for that. Hit that like button if any part of this meant something to you tonight. Subscribe to True Elder Tales so the next story finds you when it's ready. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if you don't mind sharing, tell me about the quiet person in your own family that nobody ever quite saw coming until the day it mattered most. I read every single one of those comments, and I promise you, so many of you are carrying a story just like this one. Take care of each other out there, especially the small ones. They're always watching more closely than we think, and they deserve every single one of us paying attention right back.